Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code Knuckler. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got free contests, paid contests coming to a state near you. They're giving out boosts and slashing lines and giving out bonuses all day long. Check that out. That's a fun DFS player prop platform. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. That is where I make picks for all major MMA events. We got a lot of MMA coming up this week. So, again, the Contender Series is back. ACA, PFL on Friday, Cage Fury. For all that and all the other stuff that's coming up and major boxing events, stuff on UFC Fight Pass, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Check out my, recent interlude episode with Anthony Carter of Arena Insider. We got more of those from the world of professional football coming up. I love to talk to people from that universe on this show as well. And we got some MMA guests lined up as well. Check out my MMA DFS Value Picks article coming out on Friday. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. My day on Saturday is going to be a little different than it usually is, but I will be in the MMA Discord all day, coming in and out. Let's talk about UFC 305 and your DFS and sports betting strategy for it. And folks, what is up? This is episode 147 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. And we have the aforementioned UFC 305 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
Going down in Perth, Western Australia, starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. I guess a quick word about last week is, that's where Sergey Spivak is out now. That is at least one pick that I felt good about in the aftermath. I don't know. Last week was another kind of rough one, especially when it comes to some of the method of victory stuff. It's always frustrating when you miss out on the method of victory and have the fighter right, but that's the path that you have to go a lot of the time. I don't know. Last week was definitely a weird card and all, and let's take a look real quick at some of those results. Chepe got the unanimous decision. I thought that would be inside the distance. Danny Barlow had a, surprisingly mediocre performance. Chris Gutierrez had more trouble with Kwang Lei than I thought he would. Yana Santos. Chelsea Chandler, dear God.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And it's the turning in the cage and running away the one time. Then you come and you miss weight by 5 pounds. And you still are, that fight was winnable for Chelsea Chandler, but she just didn't do enough. That is super lame. And then Charalambos Gregorio against Toshiyama Kazama. I'm glad Kazama won. But dear God, Gregorio, that was just a very lackluster effort past round one. He might be cooked now at 8-5 as a professional. Panikyanzad lost. Yusuf ended up getting another finish. Stephanie Luciano, and, what was a decently close fight, but she, really helped to close the distance in that one. So, but Janata Denise with the win over Carl Williams. And, Carl Williams got told before the fight, I guess, this is what they're saying, that by UFC brass, that he was fighting too boring and needs to fight more exciting. Dude, look. People will use it as a reason to get mad at the UFC, and you should be, because that's not what the sport is. But also, Carl, go out there and get the win. To hell with what they said. Go out there and you're going to go out there and strike with a very high-level professional kickboxing champion, and Denise pieced him up on the feet. And it was only, near the end of the fight where, we see Williams gets him down, and it looked like Denise immediately lost a lot of gas from his tank. So it's just very frustrating from Carl Williams, where, dude, really, You're 33 or 34 years old. I don't really care what someone else told you in this situation. You know, deal with that afterward. Get this win. You're not going to go, you're going to strike with Yanada Deniz? Insane. Now, I do think he had a little bit more trouble getting to Deniz than, you know, he's letting on with that information. But at least, dude, go out and get the win. I don't care what anybody told you. Because if it comes down to it and the UFC tries to cut you because they say you're too boring, you know, there will be fan reaction to that. There should be. The sport is about who the best fighter is. So if Carl Williams becomes the number one fighter in the world with a really boring style, I don't care. This is the whole point of this is to figure out who the best fighters in the world are, regardless of style. So, you know, there's been a lot of talk about that recently. I hate this push to, like, as a lot of people do, that this guy's too boring. Well, dude, this is the sport of fighting. This isn't, you know, there's other formats of fighting that are tailor-made to just make exciting, violent fights regardless of skill level. So, again, it's the grapplers being punished. But I don't care if Carl Williams got a bunch of boring decisions in a row. You know, if you don't like that, I would recommend you don't let him take you down. That's the best way to not lose to a guy that lays and prays or whatever you want to call it. Just don't let him take you down. If he's too good at it and you can't stop him, well, that's what a fight is. Anyway, UFC 305 this weekend. We got 12 fights on the card, starting off with Stuart Nickel and Jesus Aguilar. Jesus Aguilar is the plus 190 underdog. Stuart, the minus 230 favorite. Let's start with Jesus Aguilar. Winner at 3 out of 4. In the UFC, counting the Contender Series. He lost his debut. His only loss in the UFC to this point was by round 1 submission to Tatsuro Taira. I can forgive that. I can forgive that very easily. And I guess I should have mentioned that. Well, also, Jesus Aguilar, born in 1996, still relatively young. I guess I consider that relatively young. South of 30 in this sport. And I guess UFC stats is picking tonight to also be a little bit slow. But this is a flyweight bout. 2 wins in a row. A first-round knockout over Shannon Ross and a split decision against Mateus Mendonca February of this year. Split decision, and there was not a lot statistically going on in that fight. But, you know, nevertheless, 3 of 4 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series. Stuart Nickel will be making his UFC debut out of Australia, 8-0 as a professional. 29 years old, 3 wins by submission, 4 by knockout, 1 by decision, comes in from Beatdown Promotions. And, you know, every fight that he's had as a pro, except for one, back in 2021, was an inside-the-distance victory. Mostly wins in round 1, but he has finishes in round 3 and round 2 as well, so that you see some versatility. Look, this part seems crazy to me. As it should. Are we going to see this much in favor of the Australian fighters? I mean, this is a very limited professional record from Beatdown Promotions. To think that, like, immediately you have that strong of an advantage over Jesus Aguilar? You know, this is a guy that, you know, has 2 finishes in the Contender Series and in the UFC, at UFC 290, when he knocked out Shannon Ross. Mateus Mendonca, you know, was, now he's lost 3 in a row. But to Javid Basharat, Nate Maness, and Jesus Aguilar. So, you know, yeah, this is a tough one. This is a tough one. I would, you know, Stuart Nickel has done really impressive things here, in his, albeit brief professional career, for sure. Jesus Aguilar, 10-2, stylistically, this is a tough one. I think that both dudes could get finished here. Look, if I'm going Jesus Aguilar, I don't think there's any need to go with a method of victory. I think Aguilar could definitely win this fight, 40 times out of 100. He just got a split decision, landing no more than 18 takedowns with 1 takedown. 18 strikes with 1 takedown. So I think Aguilar can definitely be worth it at plus 190. It started off. Come on. Click it again. That's not coming up. So I don't feel a need to go, with a method of victory for Aguilar. And really, he'd have to be pretty cheap for me to like him in DFS. I think this guy's still too unpredictable. But, some solid victories, one more than he's lost at this level. Nickel, this is a tough debut. And you could say, it's in front of a home crowd, and it is. But that's still a lot of pressure for a dude to carry. And Aguilar's actually younger by a little bit. But if I'm going inside the distance, I would go Nickel. Nickel inside the distance is, I don't know, they don't have that one out yet, but Nickel by submission plus 410, by TKO knockout plus 575. Cross-reference those. I don't think, Nickel, that's a really risky pick as if he's going to be more expensive in DFS. That's a tough one to call because Nickel's getting this call, because of the situation, but he is a worthy prospect. It's just tough to make your debut against a guy that has already, found a certain level of success in the UFC, as questionable as a couple of those wins might be. That's still 2 finishes. So, starting off a little difficult to call. Obviously, Nickel is the guy that I do think has the greater upward trajectory. This guy could be the limit for that guy at flyweight. Who knows? He's done very well with his professional career so far. Next up, we got a welterweight matchup between Kenan Song and Ricky Glenn. Kenan Song, the minus 175 favorite. Ricky Glenn, the plus 145 underdog. Let's start with Song. All right. Winner of 1 of his last 4 fights, dating back to March of 2021. He has a unanimous decision over Rolando Bedoya in that time. And he knocked him down, which was a big, big factor in a fight where he got outstruck 112-75. He got outstruck 134-62 against Kevin Jousset back in December and lost a unanimous decision. He got knocked out by Ian Gary and by Max Griffin. Since this guy's the last time this guy had a winning streak was against Derek Krantz and Callan Potter. August of 2019 and February of 2020. That's a problem. Just not a lot of recent success for him. And all the good names or passable names that he's faced, they've beaten him. He's shown a very clear inability to rise past a certain level of competition. Ricky Glenn, similar problem. Loser now of 3 of his last 5 fights. There was a draw against Grant Dawson. He knocked out Joaquim Silva back in June of 2021, but losses to Christos Giagos and Drew Dober. Lost to Kevin Aguilar by unanimous decision November of 2018. Probably his best, claims in the UFC are beating Felipe Nover and Dennis Bermudez. So kind of similar issues for these guys, kind of, similar level of competition. Song is, slightly younger. I just see more in, the draw to Grant Dawson was a good result for Ricky Glenn. But you got finished, in your last 2 fights. You were born in 1989. That is potentially problematic. This is one where I think Kenan Song is in play to get a knockout. Not just, minus 175 being a decent value. I think Kenan Song, his resume just speaks higher than Ricky Glenn's. If it was a lower caliber of fighter, Ricky Glenn at plus 145 could make a lot of sense. But Kenan Song, I think, is just a bit too much for the names that, he has beaten. Again, limited, but he's faced tougher competition. And I don't know. So I think these guys are kind of a wash, but I give more credit to Kenan Song for his resume. So I think minus 175 is, fairly appropriate. It started off at minus 230. So people weren't feeling that. Song by TKO knockout, plus 148. I think that's probably the best method of victory pick that you're going to get. Ricky Glenn, maybe by TKO knockout as well, but maybe by unanimous decisions, maybe a bit more realistic. Glenn by decisions plus 400. Glenn by TKO knockout plus 500. Similar values. Honestly, I'm not feeling super strong about anything that I've seen so far in these first couple. But next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Tom Nolan and Alex Reyes. This matchup's catching some heat.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
Tom Nolan is the minus 1,200 favorite. Alex Reyes, the plus 750 underdog.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
Let's talk about Alex Reyes first. We don't see this very often, especially when, the guy's got a pro record of 13-4. But oh wait, he's 37 years old. 9 wins by knockout, 4 by submission, 0 by decision. This guy's last win in professional mixed martial arts was August of 2017 at FCOC 48 with a round 1 knockout over Gil Guardado. Whew. All right, so, this is a guy that a long time ago fought in some solid organizations. Gladiator Challenge, KOTC, long-standing organizations. Fought Mike Perry back in September 2017, got knocked out in the first round, had 3 straight fights canceled over a 6-year period, and then got knocked out in the first round by Charlie Campbell. Tom Nolan, 7-1 as a pro, 24 years old, currently ranks the number 129 best lightweight in the world according to Tapology. 5 wins by knockout, 2 by decision. This guy came from Eternal MMA. Love to see it. I love that organization. Has a, fairly well-bodied amateur career that only features 1 loss. And he was in Eternal MMA and XFC for that run as well. Was on the Contender Series, got a first-round knockout over Bogdan Grad. He did lose his UFC debut to Nicholas Mata by first-round knockout, but bounced back May of this year at UFC Fight Night against Victor Martinez, knocking him out in the first round. His first 2 professional wins were by unanimous decision. Every fight since then has ended in a knockout, whether it's a win or loss, but it has mostly been wins. Tom Nolan should destroy Alex Reyes. I'll say it again, Alex Reyes.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
I saw this take on Twitter this week, and I don't know who said it, so, find that person, give the credit to them. But this is a very obvious matchup of the UFC wanting to get a win for a young Australian prospect in front of a home crowd. It's almost criminal. This puts Alex Reyes in some legitimate danger. Tom Nolan by TKO knockout minus 435. If you're throwing this in a parlay, you go Nolan by TKO knockout minus 435. That is how it should end. Nolan has all the makings of a very legitimate prospect. Alex Reyes has all the makings of a guy that 10 years ago probably shouldn't have been in the UFC. Now at 37, coming off 2 straight losses, his last win being 7 years ago. You're making him fight in this spot. Tom Nolan should easily win by knockout. Minus 435 is what you're throwing in a parlay if you're going there. I think Nolan wins this fight 95 to 99 times out of 100. And you want Tom Nolan really bad this week in DFS. He could be very worth paying for. It's about as sure of a bet as you might see on a pay-per-view card. So, having said that, let's see if these words end up resulting in a shocking upset loss. Anyway, let's move on. Featherweight, Jack Jenkins versus Herbert Burns. Herbert Burns. Now I have to move to the other section of best fight odds. Herbert Burns, the plus 550 underdog. Jack Jenkins, the minus 800 favorite. Let's talk about Herbert Burns. Won his first 3 fights in the UFC from August of 2019. That was the Contender Series over Derek Minner, who isn't allowed around anymore. And then he got 2 finishes over Nate Landwehr and Evan Dunham in June of 2020. 3 losses in a row since then. A lot of inactivity. And he's been finished in the second round 3 fights in a row against Daniel Pineda, Bill Algeo, and Julio Arce. Granted, decent level of competition at featherweight. Arce and Algeo definitely not bums. Jack Jenkins, he is 5 years younger than Herbert Burns. He won his first 3 fights in the UFC, counting the Contender Series as well. A 3rd-round knockout over Emiliano Linares and 2 decision victories. Pretty close decision victories over Don Shainis and Jamal Emmers. Last fight was against Chepe Mariscal. He did get knocked out in the second round. And we saw Chepe come back with a win in this past week's co-main event. So, it's a bit more forgivable. Look, this is another one where everything is telling you Jack Jenkins. It's a little bit different, though. Like, Herbert Burns has a win over Evan Dunham this decade. Nate Landwehr this decade. he just got finished pretty bad by Algeo and Arce and Pineda, born in 1988. When you see that level of inactivity and getting finished that many times in a row, maybe plus 550 is a little crazy for, this, but, we saw what Chepe did this past weekend. And so Jack Jenkins is no slouch for that having happened to him. He started off at minus 535. And Herbert Burns started off at plus 400, and it's worked its way up. So like Jack Jenkins, I don't know. This is one where you're like, you have to kind of think about a method of victory here, because like I have enough questions, I guess, about Jack Jenkins and about like what Herbert Burns might have left to say like that. I don't think that minus 500 or what, minus 800 makes a ton of sense. He's 31 years old, but 8 of his career 12 wins are inside the distance. I don't think it's going to be by submission. I think if you're going Jack Jenkins, you go Jenkins by knockout minus 230 or Jenkins by decision plus 550. It seems crazy that number is at plus 550. That actually might be the best value. Just if that's how his last, 2 wins ended up going to the judges' scorecards. It's not like he's got this devastating, Tom Nolan kind of power. And then Herbert Burns is not, now I forget the dude's name I was just talking about. It's not Alex Reyes, so I don't know. I think that like Jack Jenkins by decision plus 550 might be the better value there. I think that he makes sense in DFS. He's going to be pricey. And so you do wonder whether that's completely worth it. If you're going Herbert Burns, I don't know. I think he could win this fight like 20 times out of 100. Plus 550 is not horrible. But, you could do a fun little like, and this wouldn't even be that great, of a reward. But so far we got an Australian prospect knockout parlay of Jack Jenkins and Tom Nolan. So that's a little bit of fun. We got to get creative on this one with some of these early fights. Next up, we've got a women's flyweight matchup between Casey O'Neill and Luana Santos. Casey O'Neill, the plus 124 underdog, started off at plus 140, not much movement. Luana Santos, the minus 148 favorite. Let's talk about Luana Santos, winner of all 3 fights in the UFC, 2 first-round finishes against Juliana Miller, the Ultimate Fighter winner, and Maria Agapova, July of this year. Also a decision win sandwiched in the middle against Stephanie Egger, outstriking her 53-44, 2 takedowns to 1. She's got a first-round knockout and a first-round submission. Luana Santos, born in the year 2000, has looked fantastic in her time in the UFC. And that's why she's quickly ascending to the, getting the fights like a Casey O'Neill. Because, she showed that she was way past the likes of Juliana Miller, and it was easy work against Maria Agapova and early work, and Stephanie Egger made her work for it too, but she thoroughly beat Stephanie Egger. It was convincing enough, for sure. Casey O'Neill, born in 1997, right? Used it for years because she's been in the UFC since February 2021. She was thought to be, one of the young prospects of the UFC flyweight division. 4 wins in a row to start a UFC career with 3 finishes against Shanna Dobson, Lara Procopio, Antonina Shevchenko, and Roxanne Modafferi. She landed 229 strikes against Roxanne in a split decision victory. Then 2 straight losses by unanimous decision to Jennifer Maia, March of 2023. She got outstruck 145-137. And then she got subbed by Ariane De Silva, December of 2023 by second-round armbar. Yeah, so this is the issue, right? Is like, take a look at Ariane De Silva. If UFC fight stats will load. I'm going to take a sip of water while it's doing this. I'll give it a breath. There we go. Ariane De Silva, winner of 3 of her last 5 against Mandy Bohm, 4 of her last 6. Mandy Bohm, J.J. Aldridge, Melissa Gatto, Casey O'Neill. Only losses to Priscilla Cachoeira and Karine Silva. Casey O'Neill found her success and got her way up in the rankings from beating the likes of Antonina Shevchenko and Roxanne Modafferi. Typically, people that don't kill you with their volume necessarily. But Roxanne was still able to land 120 strikes in that fight, February of 2022. Now, it does concern me when you're a fighter like Casey O'Neill, like Rob Font, for example, where you can land 137 strikes and still convincingly lose a fight. Luana Santos, on the other hand, has looked, not flawless in the UFC, but very much a dangerous young fighter. And, that is what I think has proven to be Casey O'Neill's problem, is people that are, either can match your volume or are just dangerous and have a great killer instinct. And I think Luana Santos could probably do both of those things. Stephanie Egger, was able to limit Luana's volume a little bit just because that's the kind of fighter she is. But, in the first round, to land 63 strikes and finish Juliana Miller in the first round. And, Juliana Miller, whatever you want to say about her now, it showed the gap that was between them at the very least. I don't know, Casey O'Neill definitely has a chance at plus 124. I think she probably wins 40 to 45 of these out of 100. This could be about the flip of a coin. But honestly, this is a week where I'm maybe a little bit more hesitant in those situations to go the underdog, because Luana Santos, has the greater upward trajectory. And not that we've seen the best of Casey O'Neill, but we're going to keep seeing better versions of Luana Santos. Santos minus 148. Like I said, I think she wins 55 to 60 of these fights out of 100. I don't necessarily know if Casey O'Neill gets put away here. Luana Santos by decision is plus 120. Inside the distance, they don't have that up yet for whatever reason. They've got everything else. But Santos inside the distance might just be another way to go. Santos by submission plus 650. I don't know. I'd probably just go by decision or inside the distance. Santos and O'Neill, I do think, are plays in DFS this week. Because if Casey O'Neill gets a win and also is able to land, 90, 100, 120 strikes, then that's a good scoring day. And I think that that's a very real possibility, and she could be at a very affordable price. Next up, we got a featherweight matchup between Josh Culibao and Ricardo Ramos. Ricardo Ramos is the plus 120 underdog. Culibao the minus 142 favorite. Let's talk about Ricardo Ramos first. A guy that I have loved to pick to no avail over the last couple of years. It worked out kind of well against Danny Chavez. He got that knockout. You find some really inconsistent results with Ricardo Ramos. Getting finished by Lerone Murphy, losing to Zabara Tukagov, Charles Jourdain and Julian Erosa making really easy first-round work of him. Wins over Bill Algeo in his career in the UFC, Journey Newson, Kyung Ho Gong, but that's going back to August of 2018 already. Now he has lost 4 of his last 6 fights. That dates all the way back to July of 2020. Getting finished early in the first round, each of your last 2 fights, your last win being over 2 years ago, that is a problem for Ricardo Ramos. Even though he was only born in 1995, I always think that guy's older than he is. Josh Culibao, on the other hand. And I saw a great breakdown from my dude Cody over there at Blood Money MMA Bets, seeing his stuff every week. Love to shout him out when I can. That Ricardo Ramos has a shot early in this fight. That's where he's going to have to win it. And if he doesn't, this is very quickly going to turn into Josh Culibao's show. 1-3 in a row from May of 2021 to February of 2023. 2 decisions over Shaila Nurdanbeki and Sungwoo Choi, and then a second-round rear naked choke over Melzik Bagdasaryan. Has a draw with Charles Jourdain back in October of 2020. Lost to Jalen Turner in his UFC debut. He is now on a 2-fight losing streak to Lerone Murphy by unanimous decision. He got knocked down in that fight, taken down 3 times. He lost that fight pretty handily. Then a split decision loss over Danny Silva. He outstruck him 87 to 45. He did get taken down 4 times. Yeah, if Ricardo Ramos can't finish this fight in round 1, then he doesn't have much of a chance moving forward. Josh Culibao is already a guy that's been in a handful of really close fights. The 3 split decisions on his record, a draw, a win, and a loss in the UFC. And Ricardo Ramos not programmed to go well past that first round. Coolabout is the guy that wins this if it goes to the judges' scorecards, and I think it does end up going to the judges' scorecards. I don't think he finishes Ricardo Ramos. I mean, he could. He's got one rear naked choke in the UFC, but I just don't see that being the way that this fight goes. You know, Coolabout, I think that, like, the path to victory, you know, don't let Ricardo Ramos come in and take you down early. You know, land your 50 to 80 strikes or whatever it might be. You don't need to get a takedown. You just need to keep the fight standing and don't get hit too hard, and this should be your fight. Josh Coolabout, I think, wins this fight, and he's the minus 142 favorite. Ramos, the plus 120 underdog. It started off as Coolabout minus 166. Coolabout by decision, that's plus 235. Give it to me. If you're going Ramos, I don't know, go Ramos in round one. That's plus 100 right now, but that's not accurate. That's just what they put it out as. You know, Ramos inside the distance or by TKO knockout plus 950. I don't know. Those are crazy numbers. This is a fight that it feels like is made for Coolabout to win, too, in front of this crowd. And wait. I say that, but... yeah, Coolabout's Australian. Duh. So, yeah, this is a close matchup, but I think it is well designed for Josh Coolabout. And Ricardo Ramos, a guy that I have liked, you know, to pick as an underdog, and it hasn't worked out. Coolabout, kind of in the same vein over his last two fights, but I think that 3-fight winning streak shows what he's capable of at his best, and I think it's better than what Ricardo Ramos can do and has done over a longer UFC career. That has seen him do a lot of losing to guys that are slightly above and slightly below this level. And I think Coolabout wins this fight like 65 times out of 100. I think that's a pretty hard number. Next up, we got a heavyweight matchup between Junior Tafa and Walter Walker. Walter Walker, the plus 110 underdog. Junior Tafa, the minus 130 favorite. Let's talk about Junior Tafa real quick. And I'll even go to Tapology to talk about him a little more. 5-2 as a professional, the juggernaut. 27 years old, 6'3", 250 pounds, 5 knockout victories in his professional career. Has a boxing and kickboxing pedigree. You always love to see it, before coming in. It's a different kind of thing to carry into the heavyweight division. Has a win over former sumo wrestler Tsuyoshi Sudaria by first-round knockout in Rizin back in 2022. Now, these are where the problems are, right? I love everything he did before the UFC. And maybe Austin Lane would have been a good fight to see him in. Waldo Cortez Acosta, I don't think that would have gone great. You never know. But you lose to Muhammad Usman by unanimous decision in your UFC debut. You land 22 strikes. He lands 7. But with 2 takedowns and a decent amount of very ineffective control time, you still lose that fight? Not a good way to start. And you get a first-round knockout win over Parker Porter, August of 2023. And at the time for Porter, come on. At the time for Porter, he had lost, he now has lost 3 of his last 4. But the only win in between being at UFC 288 to Braxton Smith. Parker Porter has now lost to both of the Tafas. And Parker Porter, that's a guy that stepped up in a lot of different situations. He's, actually 4-4 in the UFC. So not to take too much away from him. But then, after that win, you get Marcus Rogerio de Lima. That's such a tough ask from a guy that very clearly was not ready for that. You were going to have to knock out Marcus Rogerio de Lima, but he does not possess the overall MMA skill to overcome Marcus Rogerio de Lima's overall body of skill and land that knockout. He got outstruck 33-11, knocked down and knocked out, taken down once, thoroughly beaten. Walter Walker, on the other hand, it's a sore spot, right? This guy, first of all, is 6'6", 265 pounds. He is a giant, freakazoid-looking dude. The Clean Monster is his nickname. 11-1 as a professional, all right? He was a heavy favorite, as I recall, going into his UFC debut against Lucas Bresky. Currently ranked number 73 in the world in heavyweight. He came in from MMA series and Titan FC. He had a great professional pedigree. Before coming into the UFC, there wasn't even a contender series fight. And, that's why he was a heavy favorite. Then Walter Walker, I think he won the first round in that fight, and it looked like it was going all right. And then you slow down that much, and you allow yourself over the course of 3 rounds against Lucas Bresky. You know, he gets the 4 takedowns, and they were just super ineffective, and he slowed so significantly. Got outstruck 58-33. And, like, just to take a look at Lucas Bresky real quick and what exactly that means. Come on. Lucas Bresky, a guy that has lost 4 of his 6 fights in the UFC. The only other win was in the Contender Series. Losses, you know, granted to Martin Bidet, Mick Parkin, Waldo Cortez Acosta, Carl Williams, you know. But you see there, some of those guys, Martin Bidet, you know, that was a close fight, and Martin Bidet is an imposing opponent for guys that kind of aren't ready for the UFC and probably won't hang around. But, you know, we see the line of what like a real possible riser in heavyweight was. Mick Parkin, Waldo Cortez Acosta, Carl Williams, Walter Walker. Not that guy. I would love to sit here, you know. Yeah, I think I still have to go Junior Tafa, honestly. I don't know. Maybe Walter Walker, you know, can get Junior Tafa down, and Junior Tafa won't have much willpower to get back up. I could definitely see that. I could see this going very similar to the Muhammad Usman fight, really, for Junior Tafa. That is my problem here. I'm just so hesitant on Walter Walker. The guy's huge. I love that about him. That was a cool thing going into his UFC debut, and it just could not have fallen flatter as a result as such a heavy favorite. So, I don't know. This is probably like a 50-50 matchup. Junior Tafa, minus 130. Like, by knockout, that's plus 138. That's a great prop value. Walter Walker, I think if you think he gets this win at plus 110, I do think he can win, you know, because it's Junior Tafa. I think he can win, you know, a 40, 45, maybe even 50 of these out of 100. I think plus 110 is probably the better value. Walker by decision, plus 280. I think if Walter Walker wins this, it might just be a little bit more striking, but very similar to how Junior Tafa lost to Muhammad Usman. You know, ineffective control time, but control time nonetheless. Some of those rounds could even end up being close if Junior Tafa hits him with something hard. I just don't think that, you know, after that Muhammad Usman fight and, you know, knocking out Parker Porter, a guy that's willing to engage with you like that, that's one thing. But I think Junior Tafa's will could be broken if he ends up, you know, being on the other side of a Walter Walker takedown or just pressed up against the cage. So, Tafa by TKO knockout makes a ton of sense at plus 138. Walter Walker by decision plus 280, or just Walter Walker plus 110. And this started off actually minus 115 for Walter Walker. I think both those make sense. I think if you're going with one of them in DFS, it's absolutely Junior Tafa. It would take a lot for me to put the faith in Walter Walker and on DraftKings this week. Next up, we got a welterweight matchup between Yi Zhangliang and Carlos Paredes. Paredes, the minus 360 favorite, another heavy favorite against Li Zhangliang.
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
And I mean that more just in the fact that it's another heavy favorite. Let's talk about Li Zhangliang first. Winner of 2 of his last 5. All right. Had a 3-fight winning streak, a nice one from June 2018 to August of 2019 over Daichi Abe, David Zawada, and Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. This guy's actually been in the UFC for a good amount of time. You know, his first UFC fight was May of 2014. He's fought Diego Lima, Nordine Talib, Frank Camacho, Zach Otto, Jake Matthews. And so now you look at it, 2 wins over the last 5. Against Muslim Salikov and Santiago Ponzinibbio, granted both by knockout, you know, so in his last 4 wins are by knockout. But it's those names I'm definitely not impressed by, Muslim Salikov and Santiago Ponzinibbio, but how can you take too much credit away from Zhangliang? For, you know, he faces Neil Magny, loses by unanimous decision and got dominated. 74-16 in the striking, 4 takedowns to 2, March of 2020. Gets subbed in round 1 by Hamzat Chimaev, October of 2021. And then, famous the weekend of my bachelor party back in 2022, he loses a split decision to Daniel Rodriguez in a fight that I actually recall thinking he won. It was, everybody had it 29-28, just two had it for D-Rod in that situation. This guy's born in 1988, getting up there in age, but the nightmare, Carlos Paredes, born in 1993, on a 3-fight winning streak coming into the UFC against Mitch Ramirez in the Contender Series, Trevin Giles, and Charles Radke. It was cool that Charles Radke got finished in that one. No one's paying you to hear you talk now. So, Paredes deserves to be the favorite here. Jiang Lang is being a little bit slept on, though. Like, my biggest problem is, going back 5 years, you can't find an impressive win. I mean, I count a knockout win as an impressive win. But like Muslim Salikov and Santiago Ponzinibbio a couple years ago does not tell me, what you're capable of now. The split decision against D-Rod, that's great, but that was over 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago. And I just, it's hard to give someone too much credit for getting that dominated by Khamzat Neil Magny. Credit to, taking those fights. This is a lot of wear in the UFC for this dude. The other problem, though, is you got to go back to never to find a time when Yi Jiangliang was knocked out in the UFC. I think that could change, because Carlos Paredes, this is the oldest Li Jiangliang has ever been in the octagon. Carlos Paredes has been very impressive every time out, had a knockdown in all 3 of his fights, put all 3 opponents away. The fight never made it into the 3rd round. If this fight goes to decision, it's probably not a fight where Paredes, outstruck him, 90-10, with a couple of takedowns. It's probably not that situation. If it goes to decision, Lee has a chance. And, Lee by decision plus 600, that is not horrible. I still think that the prop that makes the most sense here is Carlos Paredes by TKO knockout. That's minus 110. This is not one, though, like as a heavy favorite that, like, at that number that I think is parlay worthy. I think if you're going method of victory, or if you're going with Carlos Paredes, you're going method of victory. I do think he wins this fight like 70 times out of 100. But that's just a tough number to give against such a longtime UFC veteran in Lee. So, again, I don't like minus 360 for Carlos Paredes. I do like by TKO knockout, and I think both these guys could be worth a look in DFS, and Carlos Paredes, I'm sure, is going to be a high-ticket item this week. Next up, we got another heavyweight matchup between Tai Tuivasa and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Perfect matchup for Australia. Tuivasa, the plus 180 underdog. Rozenstruik, the minus 218 favorite. Okay, let's start with Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Now the winner, surprisingly, of 2 of his last 3 fights, dating back to December of 2022. This is a guy that worked his way after the Overeem fight, which now happened 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fights ago for Jairzinho. Great activity level at heavyweight for that dude, really. Even though he only got to fight once in 2023. So, his best wins to date: Arlovski, Overeem, JDS, Augusto Sakai, Chris Daukaus, Shamil Gaziev. That's the most recent one, March of this year. Knocked him out in the 4th round. All of his UFC wins are by knockout. And, a fair number of them he's gotten finished in as well. He got subbed by Jelton Almeida. So Jelton can finish the submission quickly. Look at that. Really thoroughly dominated Shamil. It was very clear that fight was going Jairzinho's way from the offset, and that it was only a matter of time till Shamil got put away. So it was a great moment where, it kind of debunked any theory that Shamil was like a super legit heavyweight prospect, or, a very legit one for that matter. And it said, like, Jairzinho, is still able to do this at heavyweight at a certain level. That's Biggie Boy. Also has the knockout win over Chris Daukaus in that time. It's the win over Augusto Sakai that's important. Because, and we'll get to it. All right, let's talk about Tai Tuivasa here for a second. Born in 1993 on a 4-fight losing streak. He had that fantastic 5-fight winning streak from October 2020 to February of 2022 with knockouts over Stefan Struve, Harry Hunsucker, former guest on this podcast, Greg Hardy, Augusto Sakai, and Derek Lewis. Then a 4-fight losing streak. Gets knocked out by Cyril Gahn. Knocked out by Sergey Pavlovich. Subbed by Alexander Volkov. And subbed by Marcin Tybura. March of this year in the main event of a UFC fight night. Tuivasa, it's been an up-and-down career for him in the UFC. Losses to Spivak, Blagoy, Ivanov, and JDS, two before that 5-fight winning streak. He captured a great period of time from 2020 to, early 2022. But this is the problem. You pair a brawler, not necessarily a brawler, a big hitter, a heavy hitter, a knockout artist like Tai Tuivasa. You pair him against another knockout artist, but a guy who is a world champion kickboxer, who possesses an infinite, a significantly greater amount of technical skill than Tai Tuivasa does. Tai Tuivasa obviously has a shot to win this. It's called, his punches. Tuivasa by TKO knockout is plus 250. This fight to go to decision or doesn't go the distance is minus 700. And I think that is actually a conservative approach to that. Rozenstruik by TKO knockout minus 150. If you're going with either of these guys, might as well play the prop and go by TKO knockout. It's this, everybody wants to get this story in their head, of like how great would it be if Tai Tuivasa wins this in front of this crowd, drinks a beer out of a shoe afterward, as the underdog. I get that. It's a beautiful image to think about. But against a kickboxer like Jairzinho Rozenstruik, that's a kryptonite. It is his kryptonite. He obviously has a shot to catch Jairzinho with something big. But in order to do that, he's going to have to stand with Jairzinho. And it's still much more Jairzinho's world, where technically he's just going to be a lot more comfortable. Tai Tuivasa is the one more likely to make a real mistake here. And past the first round, Jairzinho is the one who has the ability to finish this the later that the fight goes. Tai Tuivasa is going to have to land something early, most likely. But, people are looking forward to that one. It's likely to result in a big knockout. It'd be shocking if it doesn't. I think Jairzinho wins this fight probably 75 to 80 times out of 100. Probably. 70 to 80. I don't know. I've given the reasons for, why I think Biggie Boy ends up getting that win. I just have to ignore the whole home crowd theory because it is persuasive when you start to think about it. But it's fool's gold. All right. So Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
Now we have a lightweight matchup between Mateusz Gamrot and Dan Hooker. Mateusz is the minus 340 favorite. Dan Hooker, the plus 270 underdog. Respectively, in the world, Mateusz ranked number 4, Dan Hooker ranked number 13 in the world. Dan Hooker will be fighting in front of a home crowd. Always big. Mateusz Gamrot is a guy that, of all things, it is crazy. Because even though I thought he should have lost that fight to Arman Sarukian, and, the loss to Beneil Dariush was a big setback, he's now on a 3-fight winning streak again over Jalen Turner, Rafael Fiziev, and Rafael Dos Anjos. All right? Combined, just against Turner and RDA, he landed a combined 15 takedowns. It is the norm for this guy to get 4 or 5, with double-digit potential. He's lost twice in the UFC. In his UFC debut to Guram Kritaladze, then it was a 4-fight winning streak, the loss to Belal, and a current 3-fight winning streak. RDA being your most recent win does give me a little bit of pause, but the Fiziev win is, okay. Because that was an injury. But we know what Mateusz is good at, right? He gets you down. He holds you there. And, it seems like at least if you're in this upper echelon of fighter, that he's not really able to finish you. He can keep it close enough in the striking, and it's the takedowns that get him these decisions. Dan Hooker. So actually, the winner of 3 of his last 5 fights. Obviously, this guy's been around for a long time. June of 2014, fought everybody at lightweight. Jim Miller, Gilbert Burns in 2018, Edson Barbosa, James Vick, Ally Quinta, Paul Felder. The Diamond, Michael Chandler, who infamously knocked him out in his UFC debut. Now the wins, the 3 out of the last 5. A decision against Nasrat Haqparast, outstriking him 73-27 with 3 takedowns of his own. He gets finished in round 1. 2 fights in a row against Islam Makhachev and Arnold Allen. Those do not look like bad losses here in hindsight. And then 2 straight wins, a second-round knockout over Claudio Puelles, and a split decision win over Jalen Turner, a fight that I do think he won. He outstruck him 125-100. And, this is the thing. Dan Hooker has never been a guy to, lose fights because he was getting taken down a whole lot. Not since, Jason Knight back in 2016 beat him. But Matus is a different kind of guy. It's been, a lot of people have tried. And Matus Gamrot is really good at getting them down 4-6 to up to 11 times. And against RDA, that's crazy. It means you can't hold him there for that long, but still, Dan Hooker at plus 270, it's not horrible. The home crowd will be a definite factor in this one. It will be in the heavyweight fight, but that could kind of be tied to Ivas's undoing. Dan Hooker is going to need to get Matus Gamrot to strike. That's why he was able to beat Jalen Turner, because it was exclusively in Dan Hooker's wheelhouse. Matus Gamrot, if he has any sort of solid game plan, is going to be going for those takedowns a lot. Gamrot by decision, minus 160, I think is the best prop of this fight. Dan Hooker, I don't think you need to go with a prop. I don't think, I don't know if he can knock Gamrot out. Gamrot possesses tools to get himself out of those situations at plus 800. Hooker by decision, if it stays standing or stays standing enough, plus 550. I think that makes sense too. I think both of these guys could be a play in DFS. Dan Hooker needs to make this fight, it has to keep this fight where he can actually win it. That is way easier said than done. So, in DFS, I think they're both probably going to be good values for what their prices are. Gamrot by decision, I think, is the clearest single method of victory. I think Gamrot wins this fight probably 75, 80 times out of 100, maybe a little bit more. But, because of this chaos factor and for how good Dan Hooker looked in his last fight against Jalen Turner, plus 270, not a bad number. Maybe think about sprinkling a little bit on that. It'll certainly make that fight a lot more exciting to watch once it comes down to it. But a whole lot more depressing if Matus, ends up getting him down at least a handful of times. And now we are to the co-main event of the evening. And I am really looking forward to this one. It is a flyweight matchup between number 5 and number 7 in the world, respectively. Australia's own Kai Kara-France and Steve Erz. Oh, dear Lord. All right, there's a lot of people here that I've been calling Australian, and I realize now that they're from New Zealand. So let's see. It's these very slightly different flags. Coolabah, Australia. All right. I do want to clarify this. Dan Hooker, New Zealand. All right, yeah. God, as much as I would love to not, I keep mixing those up. But Kai Kara-France is out of New Zealand. Steve Erceg out of Australia. I need a better system for determining what the differences in those flag icons are when they're that small. Erceg, the minus 162 favorite. Kai Kara-France, KKF, the plus 136 underdog. Let's talk about Erceg first. All right. So he had a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC that got him a title shot real early. Ahead of a lot of the other prospects that we all assumed he was behind in the line for a flyweight title shot. His second round knockout win against Matt Schnell, It wasn't without his struggles, but it was impressive and ended in a second-round knockout. And he had decision wins over Alessandro Costa and David Dvorak before that. He did really, it was a very admirable performance in his title fight at UFC 301 against Alexander Pantoja. He got outstruck 125 to 111, taking down 9 times to 1. The scoring of that fight ended up being, come on, ended up being 48-47 on 2 judges' scorecards and 49-46 on Dave Torelli's. There's plenty of people out there that think Steve Erceg won that fight and should be the flyweight champion. That's how good the flyweight division is right now. You put in who? Number 10 or number 11 he was at the time to fight Alexander Pantoja for the title. And it speaks a lot about Alexander Pantoja, because he takes a lot of flack as a UFC champion. But, he continues to hold the title. And, weathered the storm of a very motivated Steve Erceg. So it was a very admirable performance for Steve Erceg in his title fight. Issue being, when you have a close loss in a title fight, I do think that there is a bit of an emotional and probably physical hangover that comes as a result of that. You put all your effort into training for it. This is the biggest fight of your life. You fought your heart out and had a great fight, and it still came up just a bit short. That was just a few months ago. And so I do question, how that timeline affects certain people. Now, to talk about Kai Kara-France, whose last fight was June of 2023. He's had several fights canceled, but ultimately winner of 3 of his last 5. Had 2 finishes in the first round over Rogerio Bontorin and Cody Garbrandt. Unanimous decision win over Oskar Askarov. Then he fought Brandon Moreno for the interim title and got finished in the 3rd round. The fight was relatively close up to that point. Losses only in the UFC to Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, and Amir Albazi, June in 2023. This is a fight that I strongly believe that Kai Kara-France won. Outstruck Amir Albazi 99-43. 2 takedowns to 1. I know I am not alone in that opinion. That's far from a hot take. But Kai Kara-France, I think, should be coming off a win against Amir Albazi. And, Amir Albazi, credit to him, he's one of those aforementioned, highly touted prospects of the flyweight division. But, right now, if Kai Kara-France can do what he did against Steve Erceg, or against Amir Albazi, and against Oskar Askarov, not necessarily, I don't expect an early finish or anything like Kai Kara-France was able to do to Cody Garbrandt and Rogerio Bontorin. But, still, the only guys that have beaten Kai Kara-France, Moreno, Royval, and I just don't really count Amir Albazi. For that reason, Kai Kara-France plus 136, I think this is like a 50-50 matchup. And Kai Kara-France is just one of those guys that I don't think will ever be flyweight champion. But kind of like a Bisping situation or a Belal Muhammad, if you just hang around for long enough, I think that this guy's really good, and a situation could come up where he does fight for another interim belt or whatever it might be. Alexander Pantoja is still a takeable flyweight champion. If Kai Kara-France fought him on this card and, for the title instead of Steve Erceg, he very well could end up being the flyweight champion. Steve Erceg has shown that he's capable of that as well. But I think, for all those reasons, and for that, even factoring in, Kai Kara-France has had over a year since that Amir Albazi fight. Erceg is just a few months removed from that title fight. I don't love that timeline for him. I think that's what makes this a 50-50 matchup, and it's what makes me like Kai Kara-France plus 136. Hit it. If this doesn't work out, then I'm going to lose a lot of faith in Kai Kara-France picks at this echelon of flyweight moving forward. This did start off as plus 172 for KKF. People hammered it. Kai Kara-France by decision, plus 240. I think that prop makes the most sense for him. I think both these guys are playable in DFS as well. I'm probably going to have Kai Kara-France in, several lineups of the, handful of variations. Steve Usyk is, very deserving of that distinction too. He's just going to be more expensive, and you got to bet more to win more for him. So I'm very excited to see who comes out as the winner in that one. Either way, so many moving pieces at flyweight, but those guys are able to fight, with good regularity. So, anything at flyweight could have title implications. These guys are able to fight frequently. Unless, KKF and Starboy, with the fights that they've had canceled or whatever. I just think it's too early to say, that about Usyk and that about Kai Kara-France. This is a very close fight. And, Kai Kara-France is a very skilled fighter. Usyk coming off of a highly contested title fight that was not that long ago. Now you're carrying the weight of your country on your shoulders, and fighting in Australia. That can just be a dangerous thing for people. They think they're fine going after a title fight, and you think, I just proved that I can be the best in the world, against Alexander Pantoja. So absolutely I want to step back in there and get back to a title shot as quick as possible. That can be a dangerous mindset. But that's one of the fights I'm looking forward to the most out of these 12. And now, we are to the main event of the evening.
Break out the red panties.
If you haven't heard, been a lot of disagreements between these two guys, a lot of internet conversation about things that Izzy said and things that Dricus has said and all the implications of what Africa is as a continent, as a culture, and as a people. In this middleweight title fight, Israel Adesanya is the minus 115 favorite. Dricus du Plessis, the minus 105 underdog. And Izzy actually started off as the minus 186 favorite. So, let's talk about Dricus du Plessis first. Undefeated in the UFC, 21-2 as a professional, came in from the EFC. I love that organization. And you'd see a ton of the, South African prospects coming out of there for sure. And I think even, I love to repeat this. Oh, he fought in EFC, but I think he was a double two division, middle. So he was a KSW champion at welterweight. And at EFC, he was the middleweight champion. He was also their welterweight champion. I love that hardware from Dricus. It's what I loved about him coming into the UFC. Is KSW and EFC, those are fantastic organizations. Not just for, the shows that they put on, but guys that come into the UFC from those places that have proved themselves are 100% legit. KSW and EFC. The only loss that Dricus has taken since August of 2014 against Gareth McClellan at EFC Africa is to Roberto Soldic in KSW, where he lost the welterweight title that he had won from Soldic just 6 months earlier back in 2018. In the UFC, an undefeated 7-0. Only 2 decisions. He does have a crazy neck crank against Darren Till in the mix, but 4 knockouts. Against Marcus Perez, Trevin Giles, Brad Tavares, Derek Brunson. Robert Whittaker was what was arguably the upset of the year in 2023 when he knocked him out in the second round. And then a split decision win over Sean Strickland, January of 2024 at UFC 297. It's crazy to me that this happened this year against Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland won the belt, lost it, and it's been a crazy thing at middleweight between Sean Strickland and Dricus and Izzy and what's Pereira ever going to do? And it seems more likely he is to move up than down, or at least just stay where he's at 205. But Dricus du Plessis got outstruck by Strickland 173 to 137. He landed 6 takedowns. I thought Dricus won that fight. As infuriating as a lot of people out there might find that, and as much as some people out there would also agree with me to the same point. Dricus' shots were more effective. Sean Strickland, is very good at sustained volume at a limited, power capacity. That's how he beat Israel Adesanya. That's how he almost beat Dricus du Plessis. It's the effectiveness of the punches and those takedowns that won him that fight. So I thought he was the rightful victor there. It was a close fight, but I did think he was the rightful victor. 48-47 was the correct scorecard. But a very close fight. Israel Adesanya, actually 5 years older than Dricus. What does that put him at? 35 years old. All right. Izzy, winner of one of his last 3 fights, 4 of his last 6, and don't forget ever that when he walked into the UFC, to the time that he, won the title, defended it against, won the interim belt against Gastelum, gets the real one against Whitaker, defends against Romero and Paulo Costa, dares to be great, as he said, as going up to light heavyweight to win that fight against Jan Blachowicz, but, definitely lost, despite what the commentary made it seem like at the time, and then goes on to defend the belt again against Marvin Vettori, Robert Whitaker, and Jared Cannonier. Those, were by decision. The only, you got to go back some time for, in that stretch when he got knocked, people were starting to call him boring because he was winning by decision. Jared Cannonier kind of got the best out of him. Robert Whitaker did too. This was a guy that was far and away the best middleweight in the world for years. It was a tier 1 of Israel Adesanya, a tier 2 of Robert Whitaker, and then everybody else. Now, Izzy has lost 2 of his last 3, but, he avenged his several losses by knocking out Alex Pereira April of last year, and then he loses that unanimous decision in what was a huge upset to Sean Strickland September of last year. Like, Dricus is the more muscly dude. It's been hard, it is routinely proven ineffective at beating Israel Adesanya to get him down 3 or 4 times. And I think Dricus can do that, and I think Dricus probably will do it. I think Dricus will turn to the grappling at some point. He just has mixed results with that. In this stand-up department, because it's not like Dricus has like a puzzle of a style like Sean Strickland. It's goofy and it's unorthodox and it's awkward looking, and that could present problems for Izzy. But right now, Matt, like, Israel Adesanya, I cannot forget what that dude is. 35 years old is different, and, does Dricus hit him with some harder shots? For sure, but we've seen Dricus have problems in all of his biggest wins. Maybe not the Robert Whitaker fight, but, there's always been gaps or flaws that we see with Dricus. It's just, he keeps winning these fights, and, he finds a way to pull it out, and he can rely on his power in a lot of those things. Israel Adesanya cannot be slept on here. I don't think, Dricus will be able to land the volume that Sean Strickland was able to against Israel Adesanya over the course of 5 rounds. This was 49-46 against Sean Strickland for Izzy on all 3 judges' scorecards against him. I have to go Israel Adesanya here. As close as it was against Sean Strickland, he beat Sean Strickland, who Israel Adesanya, lost to. But that math doesn't really work out. I think Sean Strickland's style was kind of designed to get the most strikes out of Dricus and get the best strikes that he did land. And being, the takedowns, the versatility that he might have there, that can make this fight close. But I don't think that's going to be enough. I think Israel Adesanya probably wins this fight. He could win it by knockout for sure. He could win it by decision. I think, really, I'm very comfortable going Izzy minus 115. Hit it. In a 5-round fight where I think there's going to be a good volume of striking and someone could very easily go to sleep. Both these guys are playable in DFS, but at these odds, I think Izzy is going to be the better price. And just crazy that he started off at minus 186 and it's moved down that much. The age difference concerns me. I guess the kind of layoff, if you want to call it that. Izzy's a weird dude, and so is Dricus. This is what happens when you combine these two. Overall, the numbers are too close. Israel Adesanya is too good, and I think Dricus has gotten just a little bit fortunate to get to the point where he is at. And definitely could have lost that fight to Sean Strickland and needed a big upset over, Robert Whitaker to be able to get to that point. And before that, your best win at middleweight was Derek Brunson. Dricus still feels like a guy that's, not as tested as the middleweight champion, which is insane. Everybody knows I'm not a fan of the last Stylebender's personality. Not really a huge one of Dreykus's either. They're both weird. However, at minus 115, I have to say Israel Adesanya. And if you're going Dreykus, I don't know. Dreykus by knockout plus 300. Izzy by knockout plus 300. By decision, Dreykus plus 400, Izzy plus 200. I think those are all equal value. You know, I'm going money line here for Izzy. Yeah, he might be motivated to get the knockout here. That's important. A motivated Izzy is important. It's about, like, is Dreykus going to catch him with one of the big ones? Is it going to be enough to knock him out? We've seen Alex Pereira knock Izzy out. That's not the same thing as Dreykus swinging on him. So, like, maybe by decision is the more likely way that this goes, just because I do think Dreykus is going to try to get the grappling involved. I think he'll have some success with it. Obviously, super excited for this main event. Folks, that is all 12 fights of UFC 305. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. That's where I make picks for all major MMA events, stuff on UFC Fight Pass, major boxing events, on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about UFC 305. Check out my MMA DFS Value Picks article coming out on Fridays through RotoBaller now. And yeah, UFC 305, it's one of those ones where after a couple of, mediocre fight nights or whatever, people are saying, now, I'm not even excited about this card. Blah. Find a way to enjoy stuff, man. You're a fan of this. We got a middleweight title fight. We got this flyweight matchup. It's a co-main event. A bunch of Australians and New Zealanders. Some prospects on this card for sure. We're going to see some great finishes. I think that we've covered that. I think that there's going to be a lot of people getting knocked out. I think that this card is going to deliver, and I think the Australian crowd always delivers with their energy. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy UFC 305, and peace.
Break out the red panties.